Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, what do you know about Zen? How Zen are you? Does that mean you're chill? What does it mean? Well, we're going to find out because we have an author who has been on the show a number of times before, and he's written a book called Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. So we're all alive, but we could sure enjoy and appreciate these letters. So we're going to speak to the author of this book, Brad Warner. Brad, welcome to Energy Stew.
Hi, thank you for having me. Excuse me.
I enjoyed reading this book so much because it's so entertaining. You're a very entertaining guy, and in many ways that make me happy to read. You know, it's like you start off by saying, I have nothing to teach. And
Yeah.
people call me a Zen master, but there's no such thing as being a Zen master. Because what are you mastering? What's different from just putting your jacket on?
That's true.
Yeah, well, of course, you wrote it. But I'm excited about that sense of what Zen is supposed to mean.
Right, yeah.
We are supposed to be enlightened. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, pop culture has seized on that word Zen, especially in the last 10 years or so. It's become really, really trendy. But I don't think most people understand what it means at all. You know, like you said in the intro, it sort of means chilling out and stuff like that. But it's actually a very old sort of practice that's, well, there's a lot you could say about it. Apparently, I read some statistic that there's more literature about Zen than about any other philosophy or religion in the world. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds reasonable to me because Zen people tend to like to write and talk. On the other hand, it's supposed to be this philosophy that is pointing to something that's beyond words. So maybe part of the reason that there's so many words about it is it's so hard to describe something that doesn't have, that can't be described in words, and people just keep making the effort. But
that's why there are koans.
Yeah.
Because the koans are very, very hard to figure out.
Yeah, they are. I have a whole chapter about koans in the new book, and it's a fascinating subject because that's all a lot of people know about Zen. If they know anything beyond chilling out, excuse me, it's these crazy questions that Zen teachers supposedly ask their students that are very difficult to answer. But I don't think they're all. My teacher used to like to say that the koans were demonstrations of Buddhist logic, and that Buddhist logic was a form of logic. It's just one that was unconventional and took a little bit of nuance to understand. But once you understand it, the koans don't seem quite as impenetrable as they do when you first are presented with them.
I think they, according to how I'm reading it in your book, they give you insight into truth.
Well, yeah, that's the idea. They're usually short conversations between a teacher and a student, and I think in a lot of ways they're like intimate conversations. Like if you walked in on a conversation between a husband and wife, you might not understand what they're talking about either, but they know each other well enough that they understand their conversation. And I think the Zen teacher-student relationship sometimes takes on that sort of level of intimacy where it's difficult for somebody outside of the relationship to understand the conversation. But if you understand the general philosophical framework of Zen, like I say, they're not all that hard, and some of them are just really weird. Some of them are just sort of presented as like.
I'm thinking of one story in the book. It was the teacher who he put up a finger.
Oh, right, Goutet's finger, yeah.
Okay, so tell us that story.
Well, the short version of the story is that there's this Zen master named Goutet who supposedly had this foolproof way of explaining Zen, which was he would just hold up one finger and people would, understand him. And he had a student who thought, oh, that's the way my teacher understands or explains Zen. So somebody asked this student a question, and the student holds up one finger. The teacher hears about that, calls the student to him, and then the version of the story that we have passed down to us says that the teacher whips out this big knife and cuts off the student's finger. And then when the student's screaming in pain, he asks, or he holds up one finger to the student, and the student suddenly understands. And I think it's metaphorical in the sense I don't think that a real Zen teacher cut off a real Zen student's real finger. It's probably, excuse me, like a fish story that was exaggerated, over time.
Yeah,
But
but
the
it's,
idea is
yeah,
you can't just imitate your teacher. That is
exactly.
the point. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's how much of life is based on imitation, and
Yeah.
how about all religions?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing about religions. If you have, 6 people in a room who all say, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God and he died for my sins, just to give a common example, you would, if you actually quizzed each of those people, you'd find out that they all have a different interpretation of what that means. So I feel like in the Zen stream, we just kind of cut out the necessity to have a creed, and we just say, well, we all understand things a little differently, but there is a sort of common framework to our understanding that we can agree upon. But Zen is one thing I really liked about Zen when I first came across it, was how it resists any effort to make it into a dogma. So there's no there's no creed of Zen. I mean, there's an ethical framework and there's certain sutras and things that Zen people tend to gravitate towards, but there's no one answer that's ever given. It's
Right.
just a
So
lot of
don't be like
questions.
me, just be like you.
Yeah, be like yourself. And I guess that's another part of the lesson of the koan that you mentioned, the Gute's finger koan, is the student needed to be himself, not to be an imitation of his teacher. And that's what we're trying to do. You have to be authentically yourself.
But that says a lot about what's going on in the world in so many ways. Is that, and in the book you do talk about who is self, and if we don't know
Yeah.
who self is, because in the book you get to the point where you really don't know who you are, and neither do I. But we can't help but being ourselves.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to interpret it in any real clear way that is, I don't know, it escapes any definition that you
Yeah.
hold on to. And so because life is so hard to interpret that way, people look at the superficial,
Yeah.
grasp the superficial to hold on to. And it could be religions superficially behaving, imitating,
Yeah.
taking on other people's teachings and thoughts that aren't necessarily their own, but they'll apply it to themselves, even though it might not be correct, but they'll feel safe and comfortable
Yeah,
doing
it's one
that.
of those. I mean, it's one of those hard problems for Buddhists, because the Buddha had this doctrine of no self, which is one of the weirdest aspects of it. The Hindus, the earlier sort of Indian religions, had an idea of Atman, which is the essential self, which is roughly analogous to the idea of a soul, but it's much more rigid in its definitions than most people use the definitions of the soul that we get. But he rejected that idea. He said there is no soul, there is no abiding self. And so Buddhists have struggled philosophically for years to try to reconcile this. We obviously feel like we have a self. And I kind of think the Buddhists aren't denying that feeling is real, or that there is something real behind that feeling. They're just saying that this definition of self that we give to it is inadequate. And
Oh,
so we should
yeah,
find it new.
I believe that we're born into, each of us, into a very differentiated personality.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's obviously true.
Right. But what does it mean? It just
Yeah.
means that that's who we are, taking one step after another in life. And what is it? You can define that. You can say, okay, yeah, this is the story of my life. These are the choices I've made, and this is how you can identify me. But what does it mean in the larger context of, of who we need to, how we need to own ourselves
Yeah.
in a larger way, not a superficial way?
Yeah, I was the analogy I've been enjoying using for a while is like a puzzle piece. I think, the universe is the puzzle, and we're a, you can think of us as like a piece of that puzzle, and that piece has to be a certain size and a certain
I
shape and
love that.
certain colors. And in order to make the puzzle work, it has to be what it is. And if you try to change the shape of your puzzle piece to be sort of an idealized piece, well, then you won't fit in the puzzle anymore.
Right,
So
this is
you have to
great.
be who you are.
Yeah, I love that. And how many people are in denial of their peace?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are, and I think that's a kind of a problem I find with Zen people, or people who get into spirituality in general. People are often striving for a sort of perfected version of themselves that they maybe have a vague idea of what it is, and they end up not being true to what they actually need to be. So you actually have to be who you are in this world, but you also have to be able to let that go too, because if you hold on too much to an idea of self, you're not going to be very happy.
Right, that's what I
Not
love
looking at it.
about Zen and your teaching of it, is that it just is, and you behave in the way that you're designed to. So what? It's like,
Yeah,
so let's all sit down. We'll all do our zazen,
yeah,
and good for you. But don't try to look like me.
yeah. Well,
And
zazen is that weird kind of, I mean, it's a style of meditation that makes no sense to a lot of people, because you're not trying to make anything happen. You're not trying to become enlightened or become a better person or become mindful or any of that. You're actually just sitting for the sake of sitting itself. And I don't know, with the book, I was trying to think of how do I convey that to, I chose a friend of mine who died to try to address all of these things to. It was a person I'd known outside of that world of Zen. He had no real connection with Zen. He was just a friend of mine, and trying to make that sort of esoteric seeming practice seem a little bit more practical and applicable to normal life. I mean, that's been my goal all along with all the books I've written.
yeah, no, I love it because it really allows you to give up
Yeah,
and not try to be anything but just being in this world without definition, like trying to sense self. Uh,
yeah,
I I work with the human design system, and in that system, my identity is undefined.
hmm,
So people go, you're Peter Roth. You have this radio show. You have all these things. How can you be undefined? It's like, yes, I do. And I have no idea what it all means other than I just do it.
yeah. I figure the definitions are all kind of provisional anyway. I mean, you can define
Exactly.
me in this way for this time. Shinryu Suzuki, who wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, had that phrase when well, I don't want to use the dirty version, when he says, when you're on the toilet, you become a pooper. When you're eating breakfast, you're a breakfast eater. So in all through the day, you're changing your role according to the situation, and there's no definite sort of substance within all of that. We do feel a continuity, but the idea that we are the same person from moment to moment, the Buddhists would say that's an illusion. Excuse me.
Well, our mind is constantly inventing itself,
Yeah.
and so what is real? And now we're living in an age where nobody is behaving in, or not nobody, but so many people are behaving in ways that we can't even imagine why they would behave that way, um, creating confusion,
Yeah.
distrust, and I
Well,
know,
that whole idea of the post-truth society and all of that. And, in a way, in a way I can understand that, because we're kind of waking up to the fact that there isn't an easy way to define anything. So we have to kind of go beyond that. But I feel like as a society, we're feeling our way to that, and we're kind of making a lot of fumbling mistakes about it, because
Very
it's not that
smart.
you throw away everything, really. You just kind of say, okay, well, that works in this situation, and let's keep it in this situation, but uh, let's not get fixated on it,
It's
you
just
know.
that we have to get beyond this stage that we're in,
Yeah, I think so.
because we have to get back to truth. But it's really, I love Buddhist truths because they have to do with, correct action, correct, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
The Eightfold Path and the 10 Precepts, etc., are all about living as correctly as possible. And you dissect all of those in your book, and I love that. And it's fascinating to to climb into this. This book is such a gem because it allows us to really understand our life path in the essentials of it.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, taking this idea of trying to write it as a series of letters to a dead friend kind of forced me into a position where I had to explain it. And I actually liked, it was an uncomfortable position, but I ended up liking it, because I'd originally conceived of this book as kind of a primer of Zen, like a Zen 101 that would go through the sort of basics of what the philosophy is and all that. And, but I wasn't able to continue very far with that because it just got boring to me. And when I got on the idea of framing it as a series of letters to this, real friend who had really passed away recently, um, having to explain it to him made it really important to say, well, why is this significant? Why would I bother spending so much of my life working on this weird project when I don't feel like I'm a religious person. I don't even like to, I don't even like to define myself as a spiritual person, because it just, those definitions are so goofy anyway. And
Oh, it's all we have. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
we have a language. We need to try to use it in some form or another, which is also why you do zazen, because you're not using a language, you're
hmm.
just sitting in it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the practice we do is called just sitting, and as much as possible when you're doing it, what you're trying to do is get into the purity of a very simple act, which is sitting still. And you'd think that sitting still would be easy if you just decided, I'm going to dedicate myself to nothing but sitting still for the next hour or whatever time you've allotted yourself. And it's actually pretty difficult, you know.
Yet there are ways to sit still, well, not in perfect stillness, because there are all kinds of meditative techniques. And my wife is telling me, well, it's about how you breathe and
Yeah.
watching your breath. And it's like, no, that's not Zen.
Yeah, and
That's
then you don't even watch your breath. It's just like you're just sitting. It's a very hard instruction, actually. It's
right.
such a basic instruction, but it's so hard to put into
You're not
practice.
even trying to meditate.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's why it takes so long to kind of get into it, because I think at every step, at least in my early practice, I kept trying to do something with it. And I kept trying to measure it against something else. Like, well, am I doing it right? And now I that's the one of the most frequently asked questions I get from people is they'll describe their Zen meditation practice and then tell me, or then ask me, am I doing it right? And I say, well, yeah, you're doing it right. But why am I so confused? I think, well, that's part of your
That's part of
practice.
doing it right.
Yeah,
Because everybody has their own response to it, which is just, that's the way it is.
yeah, yeah, definitely is. My teacher used to have this every time I would go to him and complain about how my zazen was going and how it wasn't measuring up to what I thought it should be. He would just say, that's the content of your zazen. I'd go, don't say that, because I wanted the content of my zazen to be something, bigger, an answer, a kind of I don't know, I wanted something out of it. But when you realize when you stop wanting to get something out of a practice like Zen, ironically, that's when you start getting something out of it. You start to see that, oh, all of life is like this.
That's
All
it.
of life is this like nebulous, I don't know what I'm going to do next sort of situation. And if you can find a way to be comfortable with that, you can actually have a very nice life no matter what's going on. And that's what I think is the great power of this practice.
Yeah, I love that because life shows up in ways that we don't understand. So if things go wrong, we don't know that maybe that's right.
Well, yeah.
And if things are right, maybe we don't understand that really, no, this is not good for me.
Yeah,
That,
there were so many things in my life that I can point out where at the time they were happening, I thought, oh my God, this is the worst thing that ever happened. And then after a while, you realize what came out of that thing and go, oh no, that wasn't the worst thing that ever happened. So now whenever the worst thing that ever happened happens to me these days, I kind of go, well, maybe this isn't as bad as I think it is. I
right.
just kind of go,
And sometimes
okay.
it might even be one of the best things that ever
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah, for sure.
And so again, that comes back to the tricks our mind plays about life, about how we judge it. And
Yeah.
so judgment, it's such a big part of getting out of the way of when you're doing Zen. And and so it's not about chill.
Hmm.
It's really because chill is in denial.
For sure. Yeah.
And so it's
I
not
mean,
about denial.
there's a general chilling out, I suppose, that happens if you're going to sit down and be still for a long time. But it definitely, a lot can come out of that when you're sort of allowing your mind to just be free and come up with whatever it wants, and you're just trying as much as possible to ignore that or sit with it. Then your mind will start to cough up all sorts of crazy stuff. It's one of the reasons that some of the people in the mindfulness movement are struggling these days, is because people go and take a course called mindfulness based stress reduction, and then they become more stressed because whatever's in the mind just starts bubbling over. And so the Zen people and the Buddhists in general have known this for a long time, and that there's a lot of sort of I don't know, techniques and little things that we do to deal with that. But the mind is very uh, vast and unfathomable. So when you sort of set yourself up in a situation where you can kind of confront that, you never know what you're going to end up confronting.
Right. And so the idea is not to have an attitude
Yeah.
about it. And you do say that Zen is really an attitude. It's the
Mm.
attitude of just being open to what is.
Yeah, it's an approach. It's like that old question about whether Zen is a religion or not. Buddhism in general gets that question because it doesn't really fit. But Zen, especially as a form of Buddhism, really comes down to it. A lot of the aspects you think of as a religion just aren't there, but a lot are. So that's my preference, is to look at it as like an attitude. It's sort of an approach to things, and it's sort of it doesn't give you exactly a framework, but it gives you kind of a space to deal with a lot of things. And all I do as a Zen person is I do zazen every morning and every evening, and that seems real simple, but it's been really helpful because everything that comes out in the rest of life is informed by the fact that I've sat still with myself for at least half an hour every morning before the rest of the stuff happens.
That's great. I can't do that myself, but um, I we all have our different ways of
Mm.
feeling connected. But this is really, it's so fascinating to talk with you because it I think that, Zen can be very different from what you're saying. You're more of an authentic beingness person, whereas there are a lot of Zen centers that are very ritualistic
Mhm.
and egocentric, even hierarchical, all kinds of stuff that have to do with ego and superficial behaviors
Yeah.
that that I'm not in favor of, but a lot of people are born for that.
Well, I think it's necessary to a certain extent. If you want to get a group of people together to do a thing, you have to have certain rules about it, and to make sure
Right,
that
but it can be
the thing
overdone.
happens. Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that's one of the I never lived in a monastic Zen place. I think I spent 6 weeks in Tassajara once, which is a monastery up in Northern California. But other than that, that's the longest I've spent. And so all of my Zen training took place outside of that, which is, I had two teachers, and both of them were into trying to make it more of a something that you do in the midst of your regular life with your job and all the rest of the stuff that you
Like,
have. And I really appreciated the fact that I found that stream of it.
yes, and that really helps you be the author you are and help people understand the nature of life in ways that I think are important rather than some form that might not be um, essential enough. So we're getting to the end of the show. It's so cool to talk with you about this because you
Thanks.
really do represent to me what truth is about in terms of living a life of being present, just being purely present. And so your book is Letters to a Dead Friend about Zen, and you are Brad Warner. And is there contact information for you?
Well, I have a blog at hardcorezen.info. So it's .info because we didn't get .com. So if you go to hardcorezen.info, my blog is there and the links to my YouTube channel. And you can find the book at regular bookstores and things. If you want an autographed copy, you can order one off the website, though. So one little perk we give you that the bookstores can't.
So Brad
But
Warner,
yeah, that's where you get it.
thank you so much for being a guest on Energy Stew. It's such a joy to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.fm. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.